Welcome to Sunday School for October 11th. My name is Brandon Keaton and I'm the Director of Music Ministries here at First Methodist Church. And today we are continuing in our study of covenants that Laurel began last Sunday. She talked about that great passage from Exodus chapter 24 where the elders go up on Mount Sinai and they actually see the form of God, and they have a great banquet with him, and then after they're dismissed, Moses goes on up the rest of the way to the top of Mount Sinai where he receives the law and the covenant that was produced by that. Well, today we're going to primarily look at Joshua chapter 24, which is a covenant renewal ceremony at the end of Joshua's life. Now, this is not the first time that there's been a covenant renewal ceremony. In fact, the entirety of the book of Deuteronomy, which basically means a second law, is in fact Moses' farewell address and his recapitulation of the law. So he tells them of the law again and all the stipulations and the like of the law at the end of his life. And so today what we're going to look at is Joshua's turn at that. But you know, it's interesting too that this is not the first time that Joshua has had a covenant renewal ceremony, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But covenants, so there are lots of types of covenants, and they all fall into what we would call an ancient treaty format. Oftentimes that has a long title, a suzerainty treaty, which basically means that there's a treaty that's made between a great king or an overlord and his vassals or his underlings, people who he has conquered or who are in some kind of relationship with him. And so all of these covenants are significant because they have so much in common with these Old Testament ones. And so whereas in the others it's a king and his vassals, here it is between God and the people of Israel. But all of the treaties have certain characteristics. There are 5 of them. Most of these treaties that have been found archaeologically or however have been, they've had these 5 characteristics, and they all come from, or the main ones that we remember come from like the 2nd millennium BC, especially in the 14th and 13th centuries BC. And there's one great example is the Hittite and Egyptian Treaty of Peace that was made between Ramses the Great and the Hittites after the Battle of Kadesh. And so this was in the 13th century BC, and it had a lot of the same types of characteristics. Of course, there's a title that talks about the great king, and then there is a historical prologue that talks about all the good things that the king has done, the overlord has done, all the important ways he has been faithful to the people and how he's taken care of them. And then, of course, there are stipulations. What laws will apply to the vassal kings or to the people, and how they will maintain the relationship with the overlord. And usually that includes exclusive loyalty to the overlord or the great king. Then, of course, there are witnesses. Oftentimes this is between the gods of the 2 nations that are in the treaty. Of course, in this example in chapter 24 of Joshua, God is not one of the witnesses because he is the great king. He's the overlord, so he can't be that. But we'll talk about who is here shortly, and then also there would be a 5th section that would include curses and blessings. Curses for disobedience and then blessings for being obedient to the treaty. Well, let's go ahead and dive on into Joshua 24 verse 1. It says, "Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God." Shechem was an important place in the lives of the first generations of the Israelites. The sons of Jacob had some run-ins with the people of Shechem. There were times when Jacob lived just outside of the city of Shechem. and had a relationship with those people there. Of course, this is in the north, in the central part of what is Israel today, north of Jerusalem. Beautiful, beautiful area. It is, of course, and it's also, Shechem is between two mountains. One is Mount Ebal, and one is Mount Gerizim. And on these mountains, the Israelites were commanded by Moses before he died to renew the covenant on these two mountains and to say both blessings and curses on those mountains. And so that we already have had a covenant renewal ceremony in Joshua chapter 8 there. And so he has returned everyone to that place, this place that is very important to the Israelites. And then we move into the covenant more specifically. In verse 2, Joshua said to all the people, here we have the title. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. So we have the title for the covenant and the title for the great king, the Lord God of Israel. And then we move into the last part of verse 2, and then going on for several verses, we have the historical prologue. It says, long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan, and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them before you. And you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam. So he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the two Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them, and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Well, see, this is this historical prologue. It talks about all the faithfulness that God has had for the people, all the things he's delivered them from in the past. And of course, this goes all the way back to the generation of Abraham, and lists off those generations and what happened and how God delivered them from some very difficult things. Well, we need to hear about those things because we forget. And you know what? The people of Israel would forget. And so that's why they have to keep renewing the covenant and why they have to keep being reminded of what God has done for them in the past. Now, have there been times when God has delivered you? I imagine that there are. Sometimes he delivers us from things and we don't even know it. But how does remembering those things, those times of deliverance, those times when God is really at work in your life, how do they inspire you to be more faithful to him? He's faithful to us, and we just have to be faithful to him as well. Well, if we move on in this chapter, we get to the point of the stipulations. In verses 14 and following, there are several stipulations. Verse 14 begins, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." Now, there were lots of gods on the other side of the Euphrates. He's talking about the Mesopotamian gods and the like. Well, over the years I have collected a few little, I guess you call them idols. No, I'm not. I don't have a shrine here that I'm worshiping them, I promise. But I think that they're very interesting historically, and it kind of gives us an idea of what these folks were worshiping, or not. Anyway, but in Mesopotamia there were multiple gods, many gods, and I don't have any Mesopotamian examples, but I do have this one that is a Hittite, a later Hittite example. This is a worshiper, not really a god. It's kind of sad, really pathetic looking, honestly. But the gods of Egypt, on the other hand, were unbelievable. I mean, they were fascinating. I think for us, they are so interesting to look at because they're like a human. They look like a man or a woman, but then they oftentimes will have the head of an animal, or they could be depicted as just an animal. And so, like, for instance, I love hippos. I think the hippos are hilarious, and they're just as mean as can be. And so I know that they're so dangerous, but but I like them. Maybe I like them because they're like that. I don't know, but I like them. And so there was a hippo that was a goddess named Tawaret, and then of course there was the goddess Bastet, who was a cat, and one of the later gods. And then I found this bronze of Isis and Horus. We all know that name, Isis, and her baby Horus there. So they were all kinds of gods for all kinds of things. Well, Joshua, then moving into verse 15, says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Well, Joshua gives Israel a choice, but he's already made up his mind. And as a good spiritual leader, that's what the kind of example that we need to set for our families and for our friends and for our congregation and for our community. It is not an easy decision to serve the Lord. It is not an easy path. It's easy to slip into rebellion and be quiet about it, sneaky about it, basically going about everything the way that we want to do it. And you know what? I want to do the things that I want to do. I admit it. But the time will come when we have to choose what or who is going to control us. Oftentimes, the things that we think we are using to control the world around us, oftentimes those things actually are controlling us. Whatever that might be, love, substances, or even good things. That's the thing, is we oftentimes go right to the negative things, but sometimes it's our job. Sometimes it's our how many Bible studies we go to a week. Sometimes it's how much we give, okay? How charitable we can be. Those things can be idols in our lives. And sometimes they control us, how people think of us. But Joshua had made a commitment to God, and he was determined to set an example to the people. And so we too have to be determined to set an example for those around us. Then the people do respond, which we're glad that they do. Verse 16, "Then the people answered, Far be it from us to forsake the Lord, to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents out of Egypt from that land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who live in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. Well, so the Israelites, in responding to Joshua, reiterate those things that were in that historical prologue, all those things that God had demonstrated to the people, how he would be faithful, how he would protect them. They tick those boxes off and they say, we're going to do it. We're going to serve the Lord. How could we not? You also have to remember too that they say that he brought us and our parents out of Egypt. Well, that is the defining feature in describing the relationship that God has with the Israelites. Israelites know that God brought them out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, and that he was capable of that he was strong by a strong hand and an outstretched arm, is what Scripture says. They knew he was strong, they knew he was capable, and that he could do it. Well, then Joshua says something kind of funny in verse 19. Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. Okay, well, there's a lot here. Why would he say that they were not able to do it? We talked about the law, how hard it is to keep the law, but Moses, back in Deuteronomy 30, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing Romans chapter 10, that it was not impossible to be obedient to the law in principle, because that passage in Deuteronomy says that you don't have to go far away across the sea to find the word. You don't have to go down to the depths of the abyss to find the word. Why not? Because the word is near you. It's in your hearts. It's in your minds. It was supposed to be all around them. It was close. That was what was to keep them in that righteous relationship with God. So it's not impossible, and wasn't impossible to keep it. What was difficult, or what happens is, when we get a cavalier attitude towards obedience, or towards that, the covenant, then what happens is that when we're cavalier about it, we end up in a disaster oftentimes. We got this, and when we don't. So what I think is best for us to remember is that in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 8, the writer of Hebrews says that there really wasn't anything intrinsically wrong with the law, not at all. Because remember what we've talked about this, that the law was a means of grace. It was a means to help the people to be in relationship with the Lord. What was wrong with it was with the people, that the people did not follow it. They didn't want to. It calls God holy and jealous as well. Holy, that holiness code in Leviticus chapter 11 talks about, uses that great phrase, be holy because I am holy. Now we hear Jesus say that. Even later in 1 Peter, he uses that phrase as well. But what's interesting about this, we think, how on this earth can we be holy like that? Well, again, it's because of what Christ does for us that we can be holy, that we can be set apart. In Leviticus, it really was something that had to do primarily with the priests and maintaining their moral and physical holiness, because they had to serve in the tabernacle, in the house of the Lord. But in other places, like especially in Isaiah chapter 6, where this is the calling of Isaiah, it's a wonderful vision in heaven at the throne of God. It describes overwhelming majesty and purity, that being in the presence of God. Isaiah says, I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm not worthy of this. And of course, he needs to have the coals from the fire before the presence of God to touch his lips and to make him pure and to cause him to be able to speak the words that God is going to put into his mouth. But to be jealous, jealous doesn't sound like a good thing. And so, what does that mean? Primarily it means that God is interested or zealous in his love, that he always expresses genuine love, and he always expresses informed concern for his exclusive rights. And so he is jealous or zealous. He zealously protects his interests. Well, what are his interests? His will, of course, but also us. As his people, he wants to protect us. He is jealous and zealous for us, and that we be completely loyal to him as he is completely loyal to us. Verse 20 stipulates some curses. We've got to have some of those. It says, if you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. Well, we have some witnesses here finally. The main witnesses are themselves. You are witnesses. And then the people affirm that. Yes, in fact, we are witnesses. And then Joshua says, throw away your foreign gods. Well, we remember that the stories in Shechem, when Jacob was at Shechem in Genesis chapter 35, he told the people of his family to rid themselves of their foreign gods, their pagan images, immediately. And what did they do? They gave every one of them up and they buried them, so that way no one would worship them. But here in Joshua, the people, their response is just to repeat their oath. We are witnesses, we will serve the Lord. But the problem is that they never disposed of their gods, or at least we don't see that in Scripture. And the truth of the matter is that they didn't. Generation after generation, they would find gods, or they would use gods, worship gods that were from the area that they lived in. So, like for instance, a lot of times in a lot of archaeological findings, there have been gods like this, goddesses like these. These are fertility goddesses. Like this is Astarte, who is oftentimes in later scripture, in Jeremiah, she is referred to as the Queen of Heaven, and all. But many of these, and this is real from about 700 BC. So this is hundreds of years after the time of Joshua. But it just demonstrates that people in Judah were still worshiping false gods, even hundreds of years later. And many goddesses like this were found. These are ones that were for home use, and many of them were found within sight of the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. So we know that even though the temple was there and people did worship the God of Israel there, they were also worshiping others. So we know that happened. And it reminds me of, in James chapter 2, oftentimes when we don't put actions to our words, we end up with an ominous ending. And this is what happens in James 2 when he talks about, faith and good works or good deeds. He says, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Well, there's nothing good about it. Faith without works is dead. Well, this example here in Joshua kind of really anticipates the Israelites' apostasy from the Lord, even as early as Judges chapter 2. We're talking about 2 chapters over, and they're already looking at other gods. Because that the generation that knew the Lord, that lived during the time of Joshua and remembered all the great things that God did for them, they followed the Lord. But when that generation died, the next one did not have a defining relationship with God. And that is so important for each of our generations, to have a defining time with God, to know that He's real, to know that He is at work in our lives, to know for ourselves. That's the thing. It's like, the joke is that God doesn't have any grandchildren. Well, He doesn't. He only has children. So each one of us has to come to Him in the same way. It's easy to say, I'm going to follow the Lord, but it's another thing to actually live like that. And so oftentimes, what do we have to do? We have to get rid of the idols that we have in our lives. Now, granted, I hope we don't have idols like this. I mean, these are ugly, but sometimes our idols are just as bad, whether that might be our house or a car or something, but it can even be things like our spouse or our children or our family. I mean, all those things are good things, but when they hinder our relationship with God, there is a problem. Verse 25 finishes out and says, on that day Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. Well, of course, the book of the law of God is the law of Moses, but to that law he adds this covenant that he has made with the Israelites in Joshua 24. But you know what? The most important thing I think we can get from this too is that Joshua holds the Israelites accountable. He tells them that they have to do what they've said they would do, because not only are they witnesses, but even this stone that I've set up is a witness. Okay, that they're witnesses against what they would do if they did something wrong, or if they did not follow the covenant properly. There would be consequences. Well, who is it in our lives that hold us accountable? I think we all need somebody who will help rein us in, who will help us to know when maybe we're not really doing the right thing, when maybe we're not living the way that we should. But the only people who can do that for you are people that are in a relationship with you. And that's the same if you want to help others. You can't just speak into somebody's life if you don't know them. And you can't just speak into their life if you have no relationship with them whatsoever. People want someone who is loyal to them, that they can trust. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to be that for someone else. The people trusted Joshua because he was a great leader. He helped them. He knew what to do and he knew what to say. And sometimes that's our biggest problem, is we don't know what to do, we don't know what to say. But here is the thing, God knows, God understands, and God does not expect that we're going to get everything right. What he does expect is that we will be able to help others in that time, and in turn then there will be others who can help us as well. Then, verse 28, Joshua dismissed the people each to their own inheritance. Well, this covenant between Israel and God was meant to be a covenant where they would be completely loyal to the Lord God. And so the purpose was to make them into a holy nation that would influence the rest of the world. But like a lot of things, the Israelites became they got preoccupied with other things, like the conquest of the land, just living life. And so that oftentimes happens to us, I think, in our lives. We can spend so much time on the things that we do and oftentimes forget the end is really for us just to be in a relationship with God, to glorify him, to worship him. And so how can we put him first? How is that evident in our lives? And how can we be accountable to others and hold others accountable to all these things? How can we change our lives and then make that be something real and true? The only way that we can do it is by coming to him and living in a way that living his life, wanting to be a part of the life of God. And I charge you today, look for times where God has, and remember times where God has been good to you, where God has delivered you. Look for times where you can remind others of those times as well. And look for people that you can help and that can help you to be accountable to the Lord, not only to each other, to the Lord, and that they can help each other to be the kind of people that God wants us to be. Thanks be to God that He gives us a community where we can learn to work out our own salvation, where we can learn to work out His grace and live abundantly in it. Thanks be to God for this indescribable gift. Amen. Soul, be still, and do not fear, though winds of change may rage tomorrow. God is at your side, no longer dread the fires of unexpected